Andy, welcome, and thank you for joining us on Net Zero Conversations.
Well, thank you.
So you are the chair of the Private Infrastructure Development Group.
Yep, let's call it PIDG, it's much easier.
Let's call it PIDG. Can you tell us more about that group and particularly the interest in climate transition?
So the Private Infrastructure Development Group is a group of companies that does early stage project development, does credit enhancement and guarantees, and does long-term debt finance for infrastructure finance, predominantly aimed at a pro-poor infrastructure in Africa and emerging Asia. We're funded by the governments of the UK, Switzerland, Sweden, the Netherlands and Australia. And next week is our 20th anniversary. We started out 20 years ago with the Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund that was there to prove that there was a business case to be made for long-term finance for infrastructure projects in Africa, doing 15-year money at a time when others did not, and now lots of others do. GFANZ came along 5 years later, which is about using guarantees to bring in the private sector and also to mobilize domestic capital, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about that if that's of interest. And then the infracos develop early stage project pipelines, which we think is a critical part of solving some of the challenges. Getting to net zero is obviously massively important to all of us individually in terms of ourselves, our families and our futures. But also we think for emerging markets, helping them to build infrastructure that is climate friendly. And you're not transitioning existing infrastructure in many of these markets, you're actually building at the moment, is really important to give equality of opportunity to people. So it's off-grid is critical to us. It's operating in frontier markets. And we believe that actually if you provide good quality infrastructure to the poorest in society, you give them opportunities, but you also get more peaceful societies as a consequence.
I mean, I think those sorts of markets have often been perceived as less risky or less attractive by private investors. How do we start to change that perception? How do we get that money flowing a bit more?
Well, I think you're right. Many of these markets have been seen as highly risky. We operate in what we call frontier markets, so DAC 1 to 3 markets in UN parlance. And I think the only way that you really get the money flowing to some of these markets is by proving that the risk is overstated. Banking and finance is really all about risk and reward, and I think in many of these markets the risk is mispriced. So consequently you can make sustainable profits year after year by backing projects in these markets because you earn a higher margin. So the Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, which as I say has been going for 20 years now, is sustainably profitable. It makes money. We get debt facilities now provided to it by certain banks and insurance companies and others in the marketplace who see it as a bankable prospect. So we have projects in places like Mali and Burkina Faso and Malawi, but we tend to find that every now and then you have a stress project. There's normally a way to work it through, and the loss record is actually much, much better than people think from the outside. And what that's done is it's transformed that perception over time. So people will now go into some of these projects without us. Now, the other thing that you do in some of these markets that is important and that we think is really important is using the credit enhancement capabilities, using the first loss capabilities of GFANZ, which is also part of the PIDG group, to encourage people to take the step they otherwise might not be able to. We've seen it work particularly well in markets where we've mobilized local debt capital markets, but also where we've had people come into markets purely because they know they've been able to rely upon our guarantee in the event that something goes wrong.
So if we're successful in scaling up the finance that's going to these emerging economies, is there the pipeline of projects to receive this capital, or is that another area that we need to focus on? That's
definitely an area we need to focus on. So some years ago, my predecessors at PIDG saw the shortage of projects in the pipeline and set up the infracos, which are part of the PIDG group as well, to do early stage project development, to take that early stage risk, which was really important and has done well. And similarly, the IFC has a similar venture. We think more is needed. We've been saying that for some time. What's really pleasing to me as an outcome of COP26 We saw the G7 report on infrastructure going to the UK government in December, I think it was, that specifically said there are two things that we should be thinking about and doing more about. And one is early stage project preparation. And the second one is the use of blended finance and credit enhancements, such as guarantees, to bring in private sector more actively. So the dialogue is really starting to change. And I think what that means is that governments are thinking about how do we get that early stage project preparation? How do we do that without wasting money? Because obviously it's easy to throw money at a problem without solving it. Now, 2 years ago, no one was talking about this. Today, at today's conference, I've heard Secretary of State Kerry talk about it. I've heard Alok Sharma talk about it. It's really exciting to hear this being a mainstream dialogue now.
Absolutely. And it sounds like that there needs to be dialogue between governments as well, from emerging countries that obviously need to scale up the projects versus where the finance arguably may be coming from. So I think with that kind of policy lens, can you touch on some of the key things that you think that governments around the world need to be doing and prioritising in order to get this working better?
Well, I think a lot of the early stage project preparation is not really around governments. Sometimes there's a bit of a policy tweak required here or there, but I don't think that's huge. This is about providing enough money to pump prime a portfolio of projects in emerging markets. And that can be private sector led with some public sector finance in it. It can be private sector led, supported by the likes of the Infracos or Infraventures from the IFC. I don't think there's a major political stumbling block there.
We look back to COP26. It's not that long ago, but it feels like a lifetime sometimes. I'm just wondering, in your view, have we progressed far enough, fast enough, or are we on a journey?
That's an impossible question to answer satisfactorily, isn't it? I think, like everyone else in this space, I'm naturally impatient, and the answer is always going to be, we haven't come far enough, we haven't progressed fast enough. In reality, if you look at some of the pledges from COP26, there are large amounts, there are large commitments. So financially, it takes time to work out how to effectively spend money and how to work in a broad coalition to achieve it. If you look at some of the commitments around deforestation, etc., it will take some time to validate that those have all been held. But certainly around some of the financial commitments, I know there are serious conversations going on and a serious, sensible, collaborative dialogue is taking place. If we look at some of the smaller commitments, so one of the UK government commitments was that one of the PIDG companies would enter a 200 million guarantee facility with Axis Bank in India as a concrete example of something that we've done. That has been done. Obviously, 200 million is not big in the scheme of things, but what it's enabled us to do is it's enabled us to put together how that facility works. So it's an umbrella facility covering a number of projects, align our risk processes behind it, and that's now replicable. So we can do it again in a matter of weeks rather than months with another bank and another bank and another bank, subject to capital being available. And I think that's the answer to a lot of this. You'll have some big blockbuster numbers, but what you've got to have underpinning all that is you've got to have the replicability of projects.
Absolutely. So looking ahead to COP27, the big question is really, if it's going to be a success, what's the one or two things that really need to happen in order to do that?
I think a lot of people for COP27 will want to look back at COP26 and see there is real action. So whilst I said a minute ago that it takes time to do some of these things, we've had 6 months, we've got 6 months more, but I think a lot of people are looking very hard to say, show me the proof that this is real. Show me the disbursement that has traditionally in this field lagged the promises. So the disbursement needs to start catching up to the promises made. And that's the critical thing, because otherwise I think we lose credibility.
I was about to say that, the sector's reputation really kind of hangs on this, right? People are watching, the world is watching.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So people have to be able to see tangible changes that have taken place by the time of COP27. The other thing I'd really like to see is I'd like to see us showcasing more the opportunities around this transition, because there are some fantastic opportunities out there. I mean, I am super privileged to be a part of PIDG because you get to support some of our colleagues with some of the things they're doing out there. But we're seeing entrepreneurs in Kenya starting electric taxi companies, in Uganda doing electric bikes to transport people around on. I've got a friend over in West Africa doing solar as a service to corporates. And these these are people who all see it as an opportunity. They will all make good returns out of this. So really highlighting that actually you can do well and do good at the same time is really important to bring others out.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you. Pleasure's mine. Thank you very much.